All right, so for this game, looks like we have what is largely a sequencing game. So we have 5 of these years to work with, 601 through 605. That said, though, there is a bit of a discrepancy. So the monuments that we have to put into these years, there are actually 6 of them, F, G, H, and then we have L, M, and S. So essentially that means that since all of those monuments, they do have to fit into these 5 years, some of these years, as of right now, could have several monuments. So we could have several of these years with several spaces in them. And perhaps, arguably, you could even have some years without anything. They don't actually indicate that every year has to have something. So that's something to keep in mind. Beyond that, though, let's take a look at the rules. So the first rule tells us that L has to go later than G. So we can say L is after G, but earlier than F. So the L specifically is before F. So we kind of get this GLF range. Next, we are told that H cannot go earlier than 604. So wait, if H can't go earlier than 604, then it really can only go into 4 or 5. So that's pretty good. We can say simply that H has to be in 4 or 5. We can even leave a reminder here that H is in one of these 2 positions. Next, M is earlier than 604. So that's the same thing, but just going the other way. So M can really only go into 1, 2, or 3. And again, we can leave a bit of a reminder here that M is only going to go into one of these 3 positions. That's kind of nice. And lastly, 2 of the monuments were begun in 601, and nothing else was begun in the same year as any other. So that actually does a lot for us. So that tells us that the first year is definitely going to have 2 there, and you can't have any more doubles. So that means that every other year has to have just 1. And that kind of resolves the spacing in a sense, right? Since we only have 6, that would only allow for 1 double if every other year can only have 1. So really, every year will have exactly 1 except for the first year. So from there, in terms of I suppose the GLF range is kind of restrictive here, isn't it? Because, I mean, for example, actually, no, I suppose you could have the GLF in 1, 2, and 3 because M could double up into the 1. But on the other end, it wouldn't be possible, for example, to do G, L, and F in 3, 4, 5 because then H would have nowhere to go. I guess you could do the G in 2 on the other hand, but then only if, I guess, L, let's focus on the L. L could never go into 4, right? Because then you would have L and F in 4, 5, and H would have no space. So L can really only go into 2 or 3. That's pretty good. In fact, actually, let's exhaust that because there's only 2 major plays for what L can do. Either L's going to go here or L's going to go there. In the top scenario, G gets forced into 1. And in the bottom scenario, I guess it's a bit, although in the bottom scenario, we know that F has to go somewhere here together with H. So here we know that F and H will split between 4 and 5. Now, can we do anything else? And I suppose we can't do too much. So here we know that G has to go somewhere around 1 or 2, but that's also true of everybody else. M would have to go somewhere over there, and S also would have to go somewhere over there. S, for the record, has no other real restrictions. In the top template over here, yeah, F will go somewhere around here, so H will have to go somewhere around there as well, but M has flexibility. It can move around, so it's not as restricted. You know what? Let's go with this. The questions. So the questions themselves. Question number 1. This is our standard exclusion question, so as usual, we'll just go by the rules. Actually, for this one, we can kind of cut through this a little bit. Answer choice A automatically gets disqualified just because 601 cannot have just one thing. But for the rest of these, so the first rule, we have L has to go later than G and earlier than F. So basically we have that GLF setup. So going through the answer choices, let's see if anything violates that. B looks okay. C violates it. We have GFL, which is not cool. D looks good and E looks good. Next, H has to go in essentially 4 or 5. So B violates that. There's no H in the last 2 years. D and E, however, are both fine. And lastly, M cannot go earlier than 604, so M has to go in the first 3 positions. and that disqualifies D. So the best answer to question number 1 then is answer choice E. And as usual, I guess let's plug that into the board. Answer choice E gives us G and S in the first year, and then we have L, M, H, F. Next, question number, so 2 is global. We'll come back to this one in a moment. Oh, looks like we only have one local question. It's the last one, number 6, which says, if M is later than L, so if M is later than L, so we already have this GLF set up, right? So if M is later than L, actually, I suppose right away, if you look at our exhaustion here, the second possibility is that's not really possible because there's no way to fit M down here. So if we have L as later than M, we're stuck in the top template. Oh, and on top of that, M has to go then into 3 because it can't go any later. So if M is later than L, then we're going to have L in 2 and M in 3. And then G will go into the first position. And then from there, oh, I suppose H and F. So F has to go later than L, so somewhere around here together with H. So these guys will still split here. And that leaves us with S, who's going to have to go into 1. So that's pretty good. Let's take a look. The question asks, what could be true? Answer choice A, F is in 3, and no, that's definitely not happening right now. B, G is in 2, and also no. H is in 5, and maybe H and F can still split these, so that could potentially happen. Just in case though, D, L is in 3, and definitely not, and S is in 4, definitely not. Best answer to question number 6 is C. Next, back to the globals. Number 2, what is the latest that L could go? And I suppose we've already answered that question in our templates. We know that L is only in 2 or in 3. So the latest that L can go is in 3. Best answer here is C. Next, question number 3. So for this, here we're being asked what would completely lock down the game if it were true. I guess let's go through the answers. Answer choice A, if F is in 603. Now, if F is in 603, that would force us into the top template. So F would go here. And the thing is, though, at that point, I mean, I guess M would still have to go into 1, so that's something. But then H and S, they can kind of flip around 4 and 5, so we would have flexibility. That wouldn't be enough. Next, G is in 602. Now, if G is in 602, that forces us into the bottom template, where G goes into number 2. And then M, I suppose, would have to go into number 1. But consider that F and H are still going to flip. There's nothing that restricts them one way or the other, so that wouldn't be enough. Answer choice C, H is in 605. Now, that arguably is consistent with both of these templates. I mean, H could arguably go here or here, which means that if both templates could still work, that wouldn't be enough to completely lock the game. C is out. D, M is in 602. Now that would force you down here into the second template, but again, kind of similar to before, F and H could easily still split. There would be nothing that restricts them one way or the other, so this doesn't seem like it would be enough. Answer choice E, S is in 604. Ooh, well, it's the last answer choice, but what does that do? Well, if S is in 604, that would force us into the top template because that would never happen here. So S would have to go here, but then H, here we go, would have to go into 605. Oh, and F has to follow the L, so F would go into 603, and that forces the M into 601. That takes care of it. The best answer to question number 3 is E. Next, question number 4. What must happen? Let's take a look. F is later than M. Now, does F have to go later than M? I mean, historically, I suppose it kind of has. But does it have to necessarily? Let's look at our, well, actually, wait a minute. We know that F has to go after L. So, I mean, in this template, F is obviously after M. But in the top template, still, F at the earliest would be able to go into number 3. And if that happens, even then, M would get forced into 1. So, yeah, F seemingly actually does always have to go later than M. The best answer to question number 4 is A. For the record, though, we can take a quick look at the rest. Answer choice B, F is later than S. Does that have to be true? And that's not as certain, because if you put an F over here, S and H could kind of play. In fact, we had a scenario where S would have gone into 4. So that doesn't have to be true. Answer choice C, H is later than F. And no, this one's an easy pickup. We know H and F can flip between 4 and 5. So C is out. Next, H is later than S. Does that have to be true? And, arguably S could go last with H and 4. We've kind of discussed those possibilities, so that doesn't have to be true. Answer choice E, M is later than G. Does that have to be true? And no, because M could arguably go with G over here, so it wouldn't have to go later. So once again, the best answer to number 4 is A. And again, to be fair, if you locked down that A definitely have to be true, then you wouldn't go through all the other answer choices. You could just run with that from the get-go. Next, number 5. L must be the monument that's in 602 if which of these is true. Now, this one can be a bit of a tricky question because it almost seems like it asks you what would happen if you knew that L is in 602. But that's not quite the question. This isn't asking you for or about the consequences of L going into 602. Rather, it's the other way around. It's asking you which of these answers would force L into 602 in the first place. So we can't just put L into 602 and see where it takes us. Instead, we have to go the other way. We have to consider each answer and see if that would force L to go into 602. So answer choice A. If F was in 5, would that force L into 602? Now you'll notice that if F was in 5, that could happen in this second template because F and H could go either way. So you could have put F here while L would have gone into 3. So putting F into 605 would not be enough to force L into 2 because it could have also gone into 3. So A is out. Next, G is in 601. Now the thing is, in the second scenario here, we could have had a G in this position and nothing would have broken. This still would have worked. So there's a situation in which G could have been in 601 while L is in 603. Which means that wouldn't be enough to force L into 602. Next, H is in 604, same thing as F. I mean, if H goes here, then L could have still gone into 3. This wouldn't be enough to force L into 2. Next, M is in 601, and arguably, yeah, if we put M over here, that's still consistent. We could have had G and M, for example, and then S can go here. So L could have still been in 3. That wouldn't have forced L into 602. Lastly, S is in 603. Oh, and yeah, that's an easy pickup because if S is in 603, then this scenario is impossible. So S would go here and then L gets forced into 2. Done. Best answer to question number 5 is E.